Chapter 1. Jamaica Inn. It was a cold gray day in late November, and although it was now only a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the dark of a winter evening seemed to have come down over the hills, hiding them in mist. The air was cold, and in spite of the tightly closed windows, it found its way into the coach. There must have been a small crack in the roof because now and again, little drops of rain fell softly through onto the leather seats. The wind blew hard, and on high ground, it blew with such force that the whole body of the coach trembled and struggled to stay upright. The wheels of the coach sank into the holes in the road, and sometimes they threw up mud against the windows, where it mixed with the rain so that any view there might have been was blocked out. The few passengers sat close together for warmth. Mary Yellan was sitting where the drops of rain came through the crack in the roof. She brushed them away with impatient fingers. Although she was only 40 miles by road from what had been her home for 23 years, she was already beginning to miss it. The courage which was so large a part of her and had helped her so much during the long unhappiness of her mother's illness and death was now shaken by this rain and wind. She remembered the letter from her aunt. The writer said that the news had shocked her, that she had had no idea that her sister was ill because it was many years since she had been in Helford. And she went on, "There have been changes with us that you will not know about. I no longer live in Bodmin, but nearly 12 miles outside it on the road to Launceston. It's a wild and lonely spot, and if you were to come to us, I should be glad of your company in wintertime. I have asked your uncle, and he does not object. He says, if you do not talk too much and will give help when it is needed. He cannot give you money or feed you for nothing, as you will understand. He will expect your help in the bar in return for your room and meals. You see, your uncle is the landlord of Jamaica Inn." The letter was a strange message of welcome from the smiling Aunt Patience, she remembered. A cold, empty letter, giving no word of comfort and little information, except that she must not ask for money. Aunt Patience, with her silk skirts and delicate ways, the wife of an innkeeper. So it was that Mary Yellan found herself traveling north in the coach. Villages were scattered now, and there were few smiling faces at the doors of the small houses. There were almost no trees. The wind blew, and the rain came with the wind. And so the coach rolled into Bodmin, gray and unwelcoming like the hills around it, and one by one the passengers collected up their things, ready to leave all except Mary, who sat still in her corner. The driver, his face a stream of rain, looked in at the window. "Are you going on to Launceston?" he said. "It'll be a wild drive tonight across the moors. You can stay in Bodmin, and go on by coach in the morning. There'll be no one but you going on in this coach." "My friends will be expecting me, said Mary. "I'm not afraid of the drive. And I don't want to go as far as Launceston. Will you please leave me at Jamaica Inn?" The man looked at her strangely. "Jamaica Inn?" he said. "What would you do at Jamaica Inn? That's no place for a girl. You must have made a mistake, surely." He looked at her hard, not believing her. Then he called over his shoulder to a woman who stood in the doorway of the Royal Hotel, lighting a lamp. It was already getting dark. come here and reason with this young girl. I was told she was going to Launceston, but she has asked me to leave her at Jamaica Inn." The woman came down the steps and looked into the coach. "It's a wild, rough place up there," she said. "And if you're looking for work, you won't find it on the farms. They don't like strangers on the moors. You'd do better down here in Bodmin." Mary smiled at her. "I shall be all right," she said. "I am going to relatives. My uncle is the landlord of Jamaica Inn." There was a long silence. In the gray light of the coach, Mary could see that the woman and the man were looking at her. She felt cold, suddenly, and anxious. Then the woman stepped back from the window. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's none of my business, of course. Good night." The driver began to whistle, rather red in the face, as one who wishes to end an awkward situation. Mary leaned forward and touched his arm. "Would you tell me?" she said. "I shan't mind what you say. Is my uncle not liked? Is something the matter?" The man looked very uncomfortable. He avoided her eyes. "Jamaica Inn's got a bad name, he said. "Strange stories are told. You know how it is. But I don't want to make any trouble. Perhaps they're not true." "What sort of stories?" asked Mary. "Do you mean that people get drunk there? Does my uncle encourage bad company?" The man did not answer. "I don't want to make trouble," he repeated, "and I don't know anything. It's only what people say. Respectable people don't go to Jamaica Inn anymore. That's all I know. In the old days, we used to water the horses there and feed them and go in for a bite of food and drink. But we don't stop there anymore. Why don't people go there? What is their reason?" The man paused. It was as if he were searching for words. "They're afraid," he said at last, and then he shook his head. He had no more to say. He shut the door and climbed into his seat. The coach rolled away down the street, past the safe and solid houses, the busy lights, the scattered people hurrying home for supper, their figures bent against the weather. Now the horses were climbing the steep hill out of the town, and looking through the window at the back of the coach, Mary could see the lights of Bodmin fast disappearing, one by one, until the last was gone. She was alone now with the wind and the rain, and 12 long miles of empty moor between her and her journey's end. She sat in her corner, shaken from side to side by the coach. On either side of the road, the countryside stretched away into space. No trees, no paths, no houses, but mile after mile of moor, dark and empty, rolling like a desert to the unseen horizon. No human being could live in this country, thought Mary, and remain like other people. The children would be born twisted, like the blackened bushes, bent by the force of a wind that never stopped blowing. Their minds would be twisted too, their thoughts evil, living as they must among rough bushes and hard stone. She lifted the window and looked out. Ahead of her, at the top of hill on the left, was some sort of building standing back from the road. She could see tall chimneys in the darkness. There was no other house near. If this was Jamaica Inn, it stood alone, unprotected from the winds. The horses came to a stop, clouds of steam rising from their hot, wet bodies. The driver climbed down from his seat, pulling her box down with him. He seemed to be in a hurry and kept looking over his shoulder towards the house. "Here you are," and he said, "across the yard over there. If you hammer on the door, they'll let you in. I must be going on, or I'll not reach Launceston tonight." In a moment, the coach was away down the road, disappearing as if it had never existed, lost and swallowed up in the darkness. Mary stood alone with her box at her feet. She heard the sound of the door being unlocked in the dark house behind her, and then it was thrown open. A great figure walked into the yard, swinging a light from side to side. "Who is it?" came a shout. "What do you want here?" Mary stepped forward and looked up into the man's face. The light shone in her eyes and she could see nothing. "Oh, it's you, is it?" he said. "So you've come to us after all? I'm your uncle, Jos Merlin. Welcome to Jamaica Inn." He pulled her into the shelter of the house, laughing, then shut the door and put the light on a table in the passage. And they looked at each other, face to face. Chapter 2. The Landlord. He was a great big man, nearly 7 feet high, with a lined face and dark brown skin. His thick black hair hung down over his eyes and round his ears. He looked as if he had the strength of a horse, with large, powerful shoulders, long arms that reached almost to his knees, and big hands. His nose was hooked, curving to a mouth that might have been perfect once but was now sunken and fallen. But there was still something fine about his great dark eyes, in spite of the lines around them. The best things left to him were his teeth, which were all good still and very white, so that when he smiled, they showed up clearly against the brown of his face. But it was a cold, evil smile. "So you are Mary Yellan," he said at last, towering above her, his head bent to examine her more closely. "And you've come all this way to look after your Uncle Jos. I call it very nice of you." He laughed again, his laugh filling the house, and striking Mary, in her cold, tired anxiety, like a whip. "Where is my Aunt Patience?" she asked, looking around her in the dark passage, with its cold stone floor and narrow staircase. "Is she not expecting me, then?" "Where's my Aunt Patience?" he repeated, copying the rise and fall of her voice. Then he lifted his face to the stairs. "Patience!" he shouted. "What are you doing? Here's the girl arrived, crying for you. She's tired of the sight of me already." There was a noise at the top of the stairs. Then down came a woman, her hand raised to keep the light from her eyes. She wore a cap on her thin gray hair, which hung to her shoulders. Her eyes were large, as though they were continually asking questions, and she had a little habit of moving her mouth, tightening her lips, and then relaxing them. She wore an old striped skirt that had once been red and was now a pale pink. Mary watched her without speaking, full of sorrow. Was this poor creature the beautiful Aunt Patience of her dreams, dressed like this, and looking 20 years older than she was? The little woman came down the stairs and into the hall. She took Mary's hands in hers and looked closely into her face. "Have you really come?" she whispered. "It is Mary Yellan, isn't it? My dead sister's child?" Mary thanked God that her mother could not see her now. "Dear Aunt Patience," she said gently, "I'm glad to see you again. It's so many long years since you came to us at Helford." The woman suddenly held her tightly, bearing her head against her shoulder, and she began to cry, loudly and fearfully. "Ah, stop that!" shouted the husband. "What sort of welcome is this? What have you got to cry about, you fool? Can't you see the girl wants her supper? Get out to the kitchen and give her some meat and a drink." Aunt Patience controlled herself. She led the way to another dark passage, and so into the kitchen where a low fire burned. "You mustn't mind your Uncle Joss," she said, her manner changing suddenly to that of a dog that has been trained by continuous cruelty to unquestioning obedience and who, in spite of kicks and shouts, will fight like a tiger for his master. "Your uncle must be treated carefully, you know. He has his ways, and strangers don't understand him at first. He's a very good husband to me and has been ever since our wedding day." She talked on and on, going backwards and forwards across the stone-floored kitchen as she laid the table for supper. There was a footstep outside the door, and with a sinking heart, Mary realized that Joss Merlin had come downstairs again. He entered the room and looked from one to the other. He pulled a chair from the wall and crashed it against the table. Then he sat down heavily and, reaching for the loaf, cut himself a great piece of bread, which he pushed into his mouth before calling Mary to the table. "You need food, I can see that," he said, and carefully buttered the loaf. He cut a thin piece from it and then cut this into 4 quarters for her. The whole business very delicately done and quite different from his manner in serving himself. So much so that to Mary, there was something almost frightening in the change from roughness to gentle care. It was as if there was some power in his fingers which turned them suddenly and unexpectedly into skillful servants. "Patience, Yasir," he said. "Here's the key. Go and get me a bottle. In the Lord's name, I've a terrible thirst." In a few minutes, his wife returned with the alcohol, which she put in front of her husband. And while she finished her cooking and served Mary and herself, he began drinking, kicking the leg of the table. Suddenly, he struck the table with his hand, shaking the plates and cups. One fell to the ground and broke. "I'll tell you something, Mary Yellan," he shouted. "I'm master in this house, and I want you to know it. You'll do as you're told, and help in the house and serve in the bar, and I'll not lay a finger on you. But by God, if you open your mouth, I'll punish you until you eat out of my hand, the same as your aunt there." Mary faced him across the table. She held her hands below the table so that he could not see them tremble. "I understand you," she said. "It doesn't matter to me what you do in the end. I'll do my work in the house and you'll have no cause to complain. But if you hurt my Aunt Patience in any way, I tell you this, I'll leave Jamaica Inn immediately, and I'll find a magistrate and bring him here and use the law against you, and then try to punish me if you like." Mary had turned very pale. She did not know it, but she had saved herself. Her little show of courage had an effect on the man, who leant back in his chair and relaxed. "That's very pretty," he said. Very prettily put. Now we know just what sort of visitor we have. Make her angry, and she shows her teeth. All right, my dear, you and I are more like each other than I thought. If we're going to play, we'll play together. I may have work for you at Jamaica Inn one day, work that you've never done before. Man's work, Mary Yellan, where you play with life and death. Mary heard a faint cry from Aunt Patience beside her. "Oh, Joss," she whispered. "Oh, Joss, please." There was so much fear in her voice that Mary looked at her in surprise. Her uncle waved his hand impatiently. "Get up to bed, Patience," he said. "I'm tired of your miserable face at my supper table. This girl and I understand each other." The woman rose immediately and went to the door. After a last helpless look over her shoulder, she went upstairs. Joss Merlin and Mary were alone. He pushed the empty glass away from him and folded his arms on the table. "There's been one weakness in my life, and I'll tell you what it is. It's drink. It's a curse, and I know it. I can't stop myself. One day it will be the end of me, and a good thing, too. Days go by and I don't touch more than a drop. And then I'll feel the thirst come on me, and I'll drink for hours. I talk then. Talk until everything I've done is told to the four winds. I've told you because I've already had too much and I can't hold my tongue. But I've not lost control of my head. I've not had enough to tell you why I live in this forgotten place and why I'm the landlord of Jamaica Inn." His voice was hardly more than a whisper. The fire had sunk low, and dark shadows stretched long fingers on the wall. The light on the table threw a great, ugly shadow of Joss Merlin on the ceiling. "The coaches don't stop here now. I don't worry. I've visitors enough. The farther the gentlemen keep away, the better pleased I am. Ah, there's drinking here all right, and plenty of it too. There are some who come to Jamaica Inn on Saturday night, and there are some who turn the key of their door and sleep with their fingers in their ears. There are nights when every house on the moors is dark and silent, and the only lights for miles are the windows of Jamaica Inn. They say the shouting and the singing can be heard as far down as the farms below Rufter. You'll be in the bar those nights if you like, and you'll see what company I keep." Mary sat very still, holding tightly to the sides of her chair. "They're all afraid of me," he went on. "The whole cursed lot of them. Afraid of me who's afraid of no man. It's the drink that's been against me. Drink in my hot blood. It's the curse of all of us, Mary. There's never been a Merlin yet that died peaceful in his bed. My father was hanged at Exeter. He had a quarrel with a man and killed him. I'm the oldest of three brothers, all born under the shadow of Kilmar. You walk out over there across the moor, and you'll see a great rock like a devil's hand sticking up into the sky. That's Kilmar. If you'd been born under its shadow, you'd start to drink, as I did. My brother Matthew was drowned in Trewartha Marsh. We thought he'd gone to be a sailor and had no news of him. And then in the summer, no rain fell for 7 months. And there was Matthew sticking up in the marsh with his hands above his head and the birds flying round him. My brother Jem was the baby, hanging on to mother's skirts when Matthew and I were grown men. I never did agree with Jem. Too clever, he is too quick with his tongue. Oh, they will catch him in time and hang him, as they did my father. He was silent, looking into his empty glass. I've said enough. I'll have no more tonight. Go up to bed, Mary. You'll find your room above the front door. Mary was about to pass him when he seized hold of her shoulder and twisted her round. There'll be nights sometimes when you hear wheels on the road, Mary said, and those wheels will not pass on, but they'll stop outside Jamaica Inn. And you'll hear footsteps in the yard and voices beneath your window. When that happens, you'll stay in bed, Mary Yellan, and cover your head with the bedclothes. Do you understand? Yes, uncle. Very well. Now go. And if you ever ask me a question, I'll break every bone in your body. She went out of the room, into the dark passage, and up the stairs, feeling the wall with her hands. Her uncle had told her that her room was over the front door. Her box lay on the floor. The walls were rough and unpapered, and the floorboards dirty. A box turned on its side served as a table with a cracked mirror on top. The thin bedclothes were not dry enough to sleep under. She went to the window and looked out. The wind had gone down, but it was still raining, a thin, miserable rain that ran down the side of the house and mixed with the dirt on the window. Whatever she would have to face in the future, and no matter how frightened she might be, she would not leave Jamaica Inn now. She must stay with Aunt Patience. She was needed here. And so Mary lay, fully dressed on her hard bed, her mind working while she prayed for sleep. She counted the minutes and the hours of an endless night. And when the first bird sang in the field behind the house, she counted no more, but slept like a dead thing. Chapter 3. The Locked Door. Mary woke to a high wind from the west and a thin, watery sun. After breakfast, during the usual morning housework, Mary was able to explore the inn more thoroughly. It was a dark place with long passages and unexpected rooms. There was a separate entrance to the bar at the side of the house, and though the room was empty now, there was something heavy in the air from the last time it was full, a taste of old tobacco. The sour smell of drink and the suggestion of warm, unclean people crowded one against the other on the dark wooden seats. Down a passage in the opposite direction from the kitchen was another room, the door of which was locked. Mary went out into the yard to look at it through the window, but there was a board nailed up against the window frame, and she could not see inside. The house and other buildings formed three sides of the square that was the little yard. Beyond this lay the road, a thin white track that stretched to the horizon, surrounded on each side by the moors, brown and wet from the heavy rains. Mary went out on the road and looked round her, and as far as the eye could see, there was nothing but the black hills and the moors. The gray stone inn with its tall chimneys was the only house in view. She went back into the house to find Aunt Patience. Aunt Patience, she began, why is my uncle the landlord of Jamaica Inn? The sudden direct attack took the woman by surprise, and for a moment she looked back at Mary without reply. Then she went red. Well, she said, it's it's a very important place here on the road. You can see that. This is the main road from the south. The coaches pass here twice a week. There are always travelers on the road. We do good trade here." "How can you say that when the rooms are never used and the bedrooms are fit only for rats and mice? I've seen them for myself." Her aunt was silent for a moment, working her mouth and twisting her fingers together. "Your Uncle Joss doesn't encourage people to stay. We do a good trade. I've told you that. Men come in from the farms. There are farms and houses scattered all over the moors for miles around, and men come from there for a drink. There are evenings when the bar is full. The driver of the coach yesterday said that respectable people did not come to Jamaica Inn anymore. He said they were afraid." Aunt Patience changed color. She was pale now, and her eyes moved from side to side. She swallowed and ran her tongue over her lips. "Your Uncle Joss has a quick temper," she said. "You have seen that for yourself. He is easily angered." Her eyes begged to be excused further questioning. Mary saw that she had suffered enough, but tried one more question. "Aunt Patience," she said, "I want you to look at me and answer me this, and then I won't worry you again. What has the locked room at the end of the passage to do with the wheels that stop outside Jamaica Inn by night?" As soon as she had spoken, she was sorry. A strange expression came over the woman's face, and her great hollow eyes looked across the table in fear. Her mouth trembled, and one hand wandered to her throat. Mary pushed back her chair and knelt by her side. She put her arms around Aunt Patience and held her close and kissed her hair. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be angry with me. It's not my business, and I've no right to question you, and I'm ashamed of myself. Please, please forget what I said." Her aunt buried her face in her hands. Then she looked over her shoulder, as if she were afraid that Joss himself stood in the shadows behind the door. "Things happen at Jamaica Inn, Mary, that I've never dared to breathe a word about. Bad things, evil things. I can't ever tell you. I can't even admit them to myself. Some of it you'll come to know in time. You can't avoid it living here. Your Uncle Joss mixes with strange men who follow a strange trade. Sometimes they come by night, and from your window you will hear footsteps and voices and knocking at the door. Your uncle lets them in, and he takes them along the passage to that room with the locked door. Before day they are gone, and no sign is left that they have ever been. When they come, Mary, you will say nothing to me or to your Uncle Joss. You must lie in bed and put your hands over your ears." Then she rose from the table and pushed her chair back, and Mary heard her climb the stairs with heavy feet. Joss Merlin was away from the house for nearly a week, and during that time Mary learnt something about the area. After helping her aunt in the house and kitchen, she was free to wander where she pleased. The moors were even wilder than she had at first supposed. Like a wide desert, they rolled from east to west with paths here and there across the surface and great hills breaking the skyline. It was a silent, empty country, untouched by human hand. On the high tors, the stones leant against one another in strange shapes. Great watchmen who had stood there since the hand of God first formed them. Wild sheep lived on the high tors. Black cattle fed on the moors beneath. their careful feet choosing the firm ground. As with inborn knowledge, they avoided the long green grass that was not grass at all, but soft, dangerous marsh. There was a silence on the tors that belonged to another age, an age that is past and gone as though it had never been, an age when man did not exist. One day Mary crossed the east moor in the direction that Joss had described to her on the first evening. And when she had gone some way and stood alone on a hill, surrounded on all sides by empty moors, she saw that the land sloped down to a deep and dangerous marsh, through which ran a stream. And rising beyond the marsh, away on the other side, pointing its fingers to the sky, was a great rock like a broken hand coming straight out of the moor, its surface neatly formed as if cut by an artist. So this was Kilmar Tor, and somewhere over there where the hills hid the sun, Jos Merlin had been born, and his brother lived today. Below her in the marsh, Matthew Merlin had been drowned. Mary turned her back on Kilmar and began to run across the moor. Nor did she stop until the marsh disappeared below the level of the hill and the tor itself was hidden. She had come farther than she had intended, and the way home was long. It seemed an age before the last hill was behind her, and the tall chimneys of Jamaica Inn stood out in front of her. As she crossed the yard, she noticed with a sinking heart that the stable door was open and the horse was inside. Jos Merlin had returned. She opened the door as silently as possible, but it rubbed against the stone floor and made a noise in protest. In a moment, the landlord appeared and called to her as she started up the stairs to her room. "Here," she said, "no hiding up there this evening. There will be work for you in the bar with your uncle. Don't you know what day of the week it is?" Mary paused to think. She was losing count of time. Was it Monday's coach she had taken? That made today Saturday night. Immediately she realized what Jos Merlin meant. Tonight there would be company at Jamaica Inn. Chapter 4. Wagons in the Night. They came one by one, the people of the moors crossing the yard quickly and silently, as if they had no wish to be seen. They were a strange collection grouped around Jos Merlin in the bar. Half hidden by rows of bottles and glasses, Mary could look down on the company and remain unseen. They lay on the seats. They leant against the walls. They sat beside the tables. And one or two, whose heads or stomachs were weaker than the rest, already lay full length on the floor. Most of them were dirty, with long hair and broken fingernails. Cattle stealers, sailors, wandering salesmen, thieves. The smell of drink and tobacco and unwashed bodies was strong. Mary felt disgust rise up in her, and she knew that she would give way to it if she stayed there long. The evening seemed endless, and her one thought was of escape. The air was so thick with smoke and breath that it was hard to see across the room, and to her tired, half-closed eyes the faces of the men seemed shapeless, all hair and teeth, their mouths much too large for their bodies, while those who had drunk too much lay on the seats or on the floor like dead men, their faces in their hands. Those who could still stand had crowded round a dirty little peddler from Redruth, who had made himself the joker of the group. The mine where he had worked was now in ruins, and he had taken to the road as a peddler and had stored up a collection of songs with which he now entertained the company. The laughter that greeted his rude songs and jokes nearly shook the roof. To Mary, there was something horrible in this ugly, shouting laughter, which in some strange way held no note of amusement, but rang down the dark stone passages and into the empty rooms above, filling them with hopelessness. Mary could bear it no longer. She touched her uncle on the shoulder, and he turned to her, his face red with the heat of the room. "I can't stand this," she said. "You'll have to serve your friends yourself. I'm going upstairs to my room." "Had enough of it, have you? Think yourself too good for us? Get out then. It's nearly midnight in any case, and I don't want you. You'll lock your door tonight, Mary? Your aunt's been in bed for an hour with the bedclothes over her head." He lowered his voice. Bending down to her ear and seizing her wrist, he twisted it behind her back until she cried out in pain. "Keep your mouth shut and I'll treat you gently. It is unwise to put your nose in where it is not wanted at Jamaica Inn, and you'd better remember that." Mary ran out of the room, shutting the door hard behind her, and as she went up the stairs, her hands over her ears, she could not keep out that sound of laughter and wild singing that sounded down the empty passage, following her to her room and even coming up through the cracks between the floorboards. Then she did as her uncle had told her. She undressed hurriedly and crept into bed, pulling the bedclothes over her head and putting her fingers in her ears, her only thought now to shut out the noise below. She slept. Then, without warning, she was suddenly awake, sitting up in bed. She listened, hearing nothing at first except the beating of her own heart. But in a few minutes, there came another sound from beneath her room. This time, the sound of heavy objects being dragged along the stone floor in the passage downstairs. She got out of bed and went to the window, opening the shutters a crack. By the light of the moon, she could see 5 wagons in the yard outside. 3 were covered, each pulled by a pair of horses, and the remaining 2 were not. One of the covered wagons stood directly beneath the window, and the horses were steaming. Around the wagons were some of the men who had been drinking in the bar earlier in the evening, and there were strangers in the yard whom Mary had never seen before. She watched and began to understand. Packages and boxes were brought by the wagons and unloaded at Jamaica Inn. They were now being stored in the locked room. Everything was done in complete silence. The men who had shouted and sung earlier that night were now quiet and serious, their thoughts on nothing but the job. Josmer Lynn came out of the front door, the peddler at his side. "Is that everything?" he called softly, and the driver of the last wagon waved and held up his hand. So the wagons moved away from Jamaica Inn, moving out of the yard one after another, some turning north and some south when they came out onto the road, until they had all gone, and there was no one left standing in the yard but one man whom Mary had not seen before, the peddler, and the landlord of Jamaica Inn himself. Then they too turned and went back into the house. She heard them go along the passage in the direction of the bar, and then a door closed. There was no other sound except that of the big clock in the hall, which rang the hour 3 o'clock. Mary came away from the window and sat down on the bed. The cold air blew in onto her shoulders and she trembled. This was smuggling on a grand scale. Had Joss Merlin the necessary brain and skills to lead such a business? Had he been making preparations for tonight's work during the past week when he was away from home? The men working for him must be carefully picked, in spite of their wild appearance, and the whole business carefully controlled, or they could never have escaped the law for so long. A magistrate who suspected smuggling would surely have suspected the inn unless he were involved himself. If it were not for Aunt Patience, she would walk out of the inn now, find her way to the nearest town, and give information about Joss Merlin. He would soon be in prison, and the rest of them with him, and there would be an end to the trade. But had she seen only part of the business? And was there still more for her to learn? She remembered the fear in Aunt Patience's eyes and those words spoken when the shadows crept across the kitchen floor. There are things happen at Jamaica Inn, Mary, that I've never dared to breathe a word about. Bad things, evil things. I can't ever tell you. I can't even admit them to myself. And she had climbed the stairs to her room, dragging her feet as she went like an old woman. Smuggling was dangerous, it was dishonest, it was strictly forbidden by the law of the land, but was it evil? Mary needed advice, and there was no one she could ask. Here she was, a girl of 23, with no weapons except her own brain to fight a man twice her size and 8 times her strength. "I'll not show fear before Joss Merlin or any man," she said. "I will go down now and take a look at them in the bar, and if they kill me, it will be my own fault." She dressed hurriedly, and then, opening her bedroom door, she stood and listened for a moment, hearing nothing but the sound of the clock in the hall. She crept out into the passage and came to the stairs. By now, she knew that the third step from the top would make a noise, and so would the last. She stepped gently, and so she came to the dark hall by the front door, empty except for one unsteady chair and the great clock. As she paused, a sudden beam of light shone into the passage, and she heard voices. The door of the bar had swung open. The men must be sitting in silence on the seats against the outside wall, because she could not see or hear them. Then suddenly a voice rang out, high and trembling, the voice of a stranger. "No and no again. I tell you for the last time, I'll have no part in it. I'll break with you now and forever and put an end to the agreement. That's murder you want me to do, Mr. Merlin. There's no other name for it. It's common murder." Someone, the landlord himself, no doubt answered in a low voice. Mary could not catch his words, but his speech was broken by a burst of laughter that she recognized as belonging to the peddler. He must have asked a question because the stranger's voice was heard again. "Hanging, is it? I've risked hanging before, and I'm not afraid for my neck. No, I'm thinking of my soul and of God above. When it comes to the killing of harmless people, and perhaps women and children among them, that's evil, Joss Merlin. And you know it as well as I do." Mary heard the sound of a chair being pulled back, and the man rising to his feet. Then her uncle raised his voice for the first time. Not so fast, my friend, he said. Not so fast. You're in this business as far as you can be. I tell you, there's no going back now. It's too late. Too late for you and for all of us. I've been doubtful of you from the first, with your gentleman's ways and your yo-clean shirts, and by God, I've proved myself right. Harry, lock the door over there and put the bar across it. There was a sudden cry and the sound of someone falling, and at the same time the table crashed to the floor. Once more the peddler laughed his disgusting laugh, and he began to whistle one of his songs. Harry, stand where you are by the door and put your knife in him if he tries to pass you. Now look here, Mr. Lawyer Clerk, or whatever you are, you've made a fool of yourself tonight, but you're not going to make a fool of me. You'd like to walk out of that door, wouldn't you, and get on your horse and ride away to Bodmin? Yes, and by 9 in the morning, you'd have every magistrate in the country at Jamaica Inn and a group of soldiers, too. That's your fine idea, isn't it? Mary could hear the stranger breathing heavily, and he must have been hurt, for when his voice came, it was sharp but faint. Do your devil's work if you must. I can't stop you, and I give you my word that I'll not give information about you. But join you I will not. And there's my last word to you both. There was a silence, and then Jos Merlin spoke again. Take care, he said softly. I heard another man say that once, and 5 minutes later he was walking in air. On the end of a rope it was, my friend, and his big toe just missed the floor. I asked him if he liked to be so near the ground, but he didn't answer. The rope forced the tongue out of his mouth, and he bit it in two. They said afterwards that he had taken 7 3/4 minutes to die. Outside in the passage, Mary felt herself go cold, and her arms and legs were suddenly as heavy as lead. With a growing sense of fear, she realized that she was probably going to faint. Her uncle's voice came from very far away. Leave me alone with him, Harry, he said. There'll be no more work for you tonight at Jamaica Inn. Take his horse and go. I'll settle this business by myself. Somehow Mary found her way back down the passage, and hardly knowing what she was doing, she turned the handle of a door in the hall and fell inside. UNP. She must have fainted and been unconscious for a minute or two before she sat up again. She heard the sound of a horse in the yard outside, Harry the peddler riding away, and then a sound from above made her lift her head. A floorboard once, and then again, quiet footsteps above. Mary's heart began to beat faster, and her breath came quickly. Whoever was hiding up above must have been there for hours. He must have hidden so that he would remain unseen by the smugglers. Someone, a friend perhaps, was hiding in the room next to her bedroom and could help her to save the stranger in the bar. But as she waited, trembling, she heard the landlord pass across the hall and climb the stairs. His footsteps stopped above her head. Then he knocked very softly on the door. Once more the floorboard made a noise as someone crossed the floor, and the door was opened from inside. Mary's heart sank, and her misery returned. Her uncle had known him to be there all the time, and that was why he had sent the peddler away. He did not wish the peddler to see his friend. Now they were coming down the stairs. They stopped for a moment outside the door of the room that Mary had entered, and for a moment she thought that they were coming inside. They were so close to her that she could have touched her uncle on the shoulder through the crack of the door. Then he spoke, and his voice whispered right against her ear. "You must say, it's your judgment now, not mine. I'll do it, or we'll do it between us. It's you who must say the word." Hidden as she was by the door, Mary could neither see nor hear her uncle's new companion, and whatever sign he made in reply escaped her. They did not stay outside the room, but went off along the passage to the bar. Then the door closed, and she heard them no more. Her first desire was to run out into the road and so away from them, but she soon realized that by doing that she would gain nothing. Quite possibly there might be other men on guard along the high road. She must have stood for 10 minutes or more waiting for some sound or signal, but everything was still. Only the clock in the hall made its usual noises, unaffected by events. Then she went out into the dark passage. No crack of light came out under the door to the bar. She laid her ear against it. There was no sound. Through the keyhole came a steady current of cold air. Mary thought for a moment. Then she opened the door and stepped into the room. There was nobody there. The door leading to the yard was open, and the room was filled with fresh November air. The seats were empty, and the table that had crashed to the ground still lay on the floor, its legs pointing to the ceiling. A last little beam of moonlight made a white circle on the floor, and into the circle moved a dark shape like a finger. It was a shadow. Mary looked up to the ceiling and saw that a rope had been thrown over a hook in a beam. It was the rope's end that made the shadow in the circle, and it kept moving backwards and forwards, blown by the wind from the open door. Chapter 5, Gem Merlin. As the days passed, Mary Yellan settled down to life at Jamaica Inn with a sense of determination. It was clear that she could not leave her aunt to face the winter alone. She must make the best of the 6 months that lay ahead. If possible, she was determined to defeat her uncle and deliver him and his companions to the law. The events of that first Saturday night were never far from her mind, and the meaning of the rope's end hanging from the beam was clear. Mary had no doubt that the stranger had been killed by her uncle and another man, and his body buried somewhere on the moors. There was nothing to prove it, though, and in the light of day, the story seemed unlikely. 2 weeks went by, and there was no Saturday night like the first one. No one came to the inn. The future seemed very black at times, especially as Aunt Patience made little effort to be a close companion. And though now and again she took hold of Mary's hand, telling her how glad she was to have her in the house, most of the time the poor woman existed in a dream, going about her duties without thinking and rarely speaking. One morning, Mary decided to clean down the long stone passage that ran the full width of the back of the house. As she was doing this, she heard the sound of a horse in the yard, and a moment later, someone thundered on the closed door of the bar. No one had come near Jamaica Inn before, and this knock on the door was an unusual event. Mary wiped her hands and went into the bar. A man was sitting there with a glass in his hand, which he had calmly filled for himself. For a few minutes, they considered each other in silence. Something about him was familiar, and Mary wondered where she had seen him before. The heavy eyes, the curve of his mouth, and the shape of his jaw, even the look which he gave her, were known to her and disliked. The sight of him examining her and drinking at the same time made her angry. "What do you think you're doing?" she said. "You haven't any right to walk in here and help yourself." The man finished his drink and held out his glass to be refilled. "Since when have they kept a bar girl at Jamaica Inn?" he asked her, and feeling in his pocket for a pipe, he lit it, blowing a great cloud of smoke in her face. His manner angered Mary even more, and she leant forward and pulled the pipe out of his hand, throwing it behind her onto the floor where it broke. "Is this how they train you to serve your customers? I don't think much of their choice. Fill up my glass." "That's what you're here for, isn't it?" he said. "As you seem to know your way about here, you can fill your own glass. I'll tell Mr. Merlin you're in the bar, and he can serve you himself if he likes." "Oh, don't worry, Joss. What's happened to his wife? Has he sent her away to make room for you?" "I call that unkind to the poor woman. Do you want to speak to the landlord or not? I can't stand here all day. If you don't want to see him and you have finished your drink, you can put your money on the table and leave." The man laughed. "Do you give orders to Joss in that way?" he said. "He must be a changed man if you do." "Joss Merlin is my uncle by marriage," she said. "My name is Mary Yellan, if that means anything to you. There's the door behind you. Good morning." She left the bar, meeting the landlord himself in the doorway. "Oh, it's you, Jem, is it? What do you want at Jamaica Inn?" He closed the door behind him, leaving Mary in the passage outside. She went back to her bucket of water. So that was Jem Merlin, her uncle's younger brother. Of course, he had reminded her of her uncle all through the conversation, though she had not realized it. He had Joss Merlin's eyes without the lines round them, and he had Joss Merlin's mouth firm, though, where the landlord's was weak. He was what Joss Merlin might have been 18 or 20 years ago, but smaller and neater. This Jem had the same cruelty in him as his brother. She could see it in the shape of his mouth. Aunt Patience had said he was the worst of the family. She was so busy that she did not hear the stones thrown at the window of the room, and it was not until one cracked the glass that, looking out of the window, she saw Jem Merlin standing in the yard beside his horse. Mary unlocked the heavy entrance door and went out. "What do you want now?" she asked him. "Forgive me if I was rude to you just now," he said. "Somehow I didn't expect to see a woman at Jamaica Inn well, not a young girl like you. I know I deserve black looks for behaving as I did, but if you knew my brother as well as I do, you'd understand how I made the mistake. It looks strange having a girl at Jamaica Inn. Why did you come here in the first place?" He looked serious now, and his likeness to Joss had gone for the moment. She wished he were not a Merlin. "I came here to be with my Aunt Patience," she said. "My mother died some weeks ago, and I have no other relative. I'll tell you one thing, Mr. Merlin, I'm thankful my mother isn't alive to see her sister now." "You haven't a good opinion of the landlord, then?" "No, I have not," she replied. "He's turned my aunt from a laughing, happy woman into a miserable slave. and I'll never forgive him for that as long as I live. We Merlins have never been good to our women. I can remember my father beating my mother until she couldn't stand. She never left him, though. When he was hanged at Exeter, she never spoke a word for 3 months. Her hair went white with a shock. What she found to love in him, I can't say. He never asked for her after he'd been taken, and he left all his money to another woman on the other side of the river. Mary was silent. The lack of feeling in his voice shocked her. He spoke without shame or sorrow, and she supposed that he had been born like the rest of his family, without any warmth or gentleness. "How long do you mean to stay at Jamaica Inn?" he asked suddenly. "There's not much company for you here." "I'm not going away unless I take my aunt with me. I'd never leave her alone after what I have seen." "What have you learnt in your short time? It's quiet enough here." Mary thought that he might be trying to make her talk. It was possible that her uncle had suggested that his brother should speak to her, hoping in this way to obtain information. "I helped my uncle in the bar one Saturday night, and I didn't care for the company he kept." "I don't suppose you did. The men who come to Jamaica Inn have never been taught manners. They spend too much time in prison." "What do you do for a living?" asked Mary with sudden interest, for he spoke better than his brother. "I'm a horse thief," he said cheerfully, "but there's not much money in it, really. My pockets are always empty." "Aren't you afraid of being caught?" said Mary. "Stealing is an awkward thing to prove. Suppose a horse wanders away and his owner goes to look for him. These moors are full of wild horses and cattle. It's not going to be easy to find his horse. Say the horse had long hair and one white foot and a diamond mark in his ear. Off goes the owner to Launceston market with his eyes wide open. But he doesn't find his horse. It's there, of course, but its hair is cut short. Its 4 feet are all the same color, and the mark in its ear is a square, not a diamond. The owner doesn't look at it twice. That's simple enough, isn't it?" Mary laughed in spite of herself. He was so open in his dishonesty that she could not be angry with him. Jem Merlin looked at her seriously, and then he bent towards her, first looking quickly over her head into the door beyond. "Look here," he said. "I'm serious now. You can forget all the nonsense I've told you. Jamaica Inn is no place for a girl, nor for any woman, if it comes to that. Why don't you run away? I could put you on the road to Bodmin." Mary could almost have trusted him, but she could not forget that he was Jos Merlin's brother, and being that might deceive her. Time would show whose side he was on. "I don't need any help," she said. "I can look after myself." Jem threw his leg over his horse's back. "All right," he said. "I won't worry you. My house is the other side of Trewortha Marsh. I shall be there until the spring at least. Good day to you." And he was off and away down the road before she had time to say a word in reply. Mary went slowly back into the house, and the cold, dead air of Jamaica Inn closed round her again. Chapter 6. Mr. Bassett's Visit. That night the wagons came again. This time they arrived empty and were loaded with the last of the goods which had been left at the inn the time before. Mary guessed that this was their way of working. The inn was used as a store for a few weeks at a time. And then, when the opportunity came, the wagons set out once more, and the goods were carried to the riverbank and transported to different places from there. The organization must be a big one, and there would be agents scattered far and wide who kept the necessary watch on events. It was with a sudden sting of disappointment that Mary wondered whether the visit of Jem Merlin to Jamaica Inn that morning had been important. How strange that the wagons came so soon after him. He had come from Launceston, he said, and Launceston stood on the river bank. Mary was angry with him and with herself. In spite of everything, her last thought before sleeping had been the possibility of his friendship. She would be a fool if she had hopes of it now. Jem might disagree with his brother, but it was clear that they were both in the same trade. It was a miserable, bad business in every way, and here she was in the middle of it all, with Aunt Patience like a child to be looked after. The next few days passed uneventfully. Then there came a fine, cold morning when, for a change, the sun shone in a cloudless sky. Mary, whose spirits always rose at the sight of the sun, had turned her morning into a washing day. She felt well and sang as she worked. Her uncle had ridden away on the moors somewhere, and a sense of freedom possessed her whenever he was away. An urgent knocking at the window made her look up, and she saw Aunt Patience making signs to her, very white in the face and clearly frightened. Mary wiped her hands and ran to the back door of the house. "It's Mr. Bassett from North Hill," Aunt Patience whispered. "I saw him from the window. He's come on horseback, and another gentleman with him." "Oh, my dear, what are we going to do?" Mary thought quickly. She was in a very difficult position. If this Mr. Bassett represented the law, it was her one chance of telling someone about her uncle. She could tell him about the wagons and about everything that she had seen since her arrival. She looked down at the trembling woman at her side. By now there was a continuous hammering on the door. "Mary, if Mr. Bassett asks you what you know, you won't answer him, will you? I can trust you, can't I? You'll not tell him of the wagons? If any danger came to Joss, I'd kill myself." "Mary!" There was no argument after that. Mary opened the heavy entrance door. There were two men outside. One had climbed down from his horse. It was he who had rained the blows on the door. The other was still on horseback. His face was brown and heavily lined. Mary judged him to be about 50 years of age. "You don't hurry here, do you?" he called. "There doesn't seem to be much of a welcome for travelers. Is the landlord at home?" "If you please, Mr. Bassett, my husband went out as soon as he had eaten his breakfast, and whether he will be back before night, I cannot say." "That's a pity. I wanted a word or two with Mr. Jos Merlin." Mr. Bassett climbed heavily to the ground. "While I'm here, I may as well look round, and I'll tell you here and now it's useless to refuse me. I am a magistrate, and I have the necessary documents." He pushed his way past the two women. Aunt Patience made a movement as though to prevent him, but Mary said quietly, "Let him go. If we try to stop him now, we shall only anger him the more." The rooms were thoroughly explored. The magistrate looked into the dusty corners, lifted old bags and boxes, examined the stores of food, all the time crying out in anger and disgust. "Call this an inn, do you? You haven't even got a bed fit for a cat to sleep on. The place is horrible. What does it mean, eh? Have you lost your tongue, Mrs. Merlin?" The poor woman could not reply. She kept shaking her head and working her mouth, and Mary knew that she was wondering what would happen when they came to the locked room in the passage. "What about you, young woman? Have you anything to say?" "I'm here to look after my aunt. She's not very strong. You can see that for yourself. She's easily frightened." "I don't blame her, living in a place like this." "Well, kindly show me the room that has barred windows. I noticed it from the yard, and I'd like to see inside." "I'm very sorry, sir," Mary replied, "but if you mean the old storeroom at the end of the passage, I'm afraid the door is locked. My uncle always keeps the key, and where he puts it, I don't know." "Well, that's easily settled. We'll have the door down in no time." He went out into the yard to call his servant. In a few minutes, he returned with his man, Richards, who was carrying an iron bar which he had found in the stable. For a few minutes, the door bore every blow. Then there was a splitting of wood and a crash, and the door gave way. It was dark, of course. The blocked windows kept the light out. The servant produced a light, and the magistrate stepped into the room. For a moment there was silence as the magistrate turned, letting the light shine in every corner, and then, making sounds of annoyance and disappointment, he faced the little group behind him. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing at all. The landlord has made a fool of me again." Except for a pile of empty bags in one corner, there was nothing in the room. It was thick with dust. There was no furniture of any sort. The fireplace had been blocked up with stones, and the floor itself was of stone like the passage outside. On top of the bags lay a length of twisted rope. Then the magistrate turned once more into the passage. "Well, Mr. Joss Merlin has won this time. I'll admit myself beaten. Now listen to me," he said, pointing his whip at Mary. "This aunt of yours may have lost her tongue, but you can understand plain English, I hope. Do you mean to tell me you know nothing of your uncle's business? Does nobody ever call here by day or night?" Mary looked him straight in the eye. "I've never seen anyone," she said. "Have you ever looked into that locked room before today?" "No." "Have you any idea why he should keep it locked up?" "No, none at all." "Have you ever heard wheels in the yard by night?" "I'm a very heavy sleeper. Nothing ever wakes me." "Where does your uncle go when he's away from home?" "I don't know." "Don't you think it's very strange to keep an inn on the main road and then to close your door to every traveler?" "My uncle is a very strange man." "That is true. In fact, he's so strange that half the people in the countryside won't sleep quietly in their beds until he's been hanged like his father before him. You can tell him that from me." He climbed onto his horse. "One other thing," he called. "Have you seen anything of your uncle's younger brother, Jem Merlin of Trewartha?" "No," said Mary steadily. "He never comes here." "Oh, doesn't he? Well, that's all I want from you this morning. Good day to you both. And away the two men went from the yard and so on to the road. Joss Merlin returned just before midday. Mary told calmly what had happened during the morning. He swore and shouted, but he was frightened. She could see that, and his confidence was shaken. "Get me something to eat," he said. "I must go out again, and there's no time to waste. You've done well today, Mary, and I'll not forget it." She looked him in the eyes. "You don't think I did it for you, do you?" "I don't care why you did it. The result's the same." As soon as he had finished his meal, the landlord rose to his feet and left the kitchen. Mary watched him cross the moor. She thought for a moment, doubting the wisdom of the sudden plan in her head, and then she ran down the field after her uncle. When she reached the bottom, she bent down beside the stone wall until his figure crossed the skyline and disappeared. And then she jumped up again and followed him, picking her way across the rough grass and stones. It was crazy, no doubt, but her idea was to keep Joss Merlin in view, and in this way to learn something of his secret plan. After a few miles, she realized how difficult it was. She had to keep a good distance between them in order to remain unseen, and the landlord walked at such a speed that before long she saw that she would be left behind. The ground was now soft beneath her feet. The whole of the low-lying plain ahead of her was wet with winter rains. Her uncle had crossed the worst of the low ground with the quickness given by many years of practice. Then he was hidden by a big rock, and she saw him no more. It was impossible to discover the path which he had taken across the marsh, but Mary followed as best she could. She was a fool to attempt it, she knew, but a sort of determined stupidity made her continue. When she reached the top of the hill, the evening clouds were thick and the world was gray. The horizon was hidden. Mary would never find her uncle now. She knew herself to be a fool for having gone so far on a December afternoon. Experience had proved to her that when darkness came on, Bodmin Moor, it was sudden and without warning. The low cloud over the marshes was dangerous too. But there was less danger from the marshes if she kept to the high ground. So, pulling up her skirt, she walked steadily forward, feeling the ground with some care when in doubt, and avoiding those places where the grass felt soft and gave way under her feet. Her legs were heavy, and her feet felt as if they hardly belonged to her, and her eyes felt sunken away back in her head. She walked on, her head low and her hands at her side, thinking that the tall gray chimneys of Jamaica Inn would be, for the first time, a welcome sight. The path was wider now and was crossed by another running from left to right, and Mary stood uncertainly for a few moments, wondering which to take. It was then that she heard the sound of a horse coming out of the darkness to the left. Mary waited in the middle of the track, and after some time the horse appeared out of the low cloud in front of her. The horseman turned sharply to the side as he saw Mary and stopped. "Hello," he cried. "Who's there? Is anyone in trouble?" Then, looking down closely, he said in surprise, "A woman! What in the world are you doing out here? Can you help me to find the road? I'm miles from home and hopelessly lost." "Steady there," he said to his horse. "Stand still, will you? Where have you come from? Of course I will help you if I can. His voice was low and gentle. I live at Jamaica Inn, she said, and as soon as the words were out of her mouth, she wished she had not said them. For a moment, the man was silent, but when he spoke again, his voice had not changed, but was quiet and gentle as before. Jamaica Inn, he said. You've come a long way in the wrong direction, I'm afraid. You're tired out. You're not fit to walk another step. And what's more, I'm not going to let you. We're not far from the village, and you shall ride there. You shall come home with me and dry your clothes and rest a little and have some supper before I take you back myself to Jamaica Inn. He spoke with such kindness, but with such firmness that Mary trusted him. Then she saw his eyes for the first time beneath the edge of his hat. They were strange eyes like glass, and so pale in color that they seemed near to white. His hair was white too under his black hat, and Mary looked at him in some surprise because his face was unlined and his voice was not that of an old man. Then with sudden embarrassment she understood, and she turned away her eyes. He was an albino. He took off his hat. Perhaps I had better introduce myself, he said with a smile. Even if the meeting is unusual, it is the right thing to do, I believe. My name is Francis Davy, and I am the vicar of Alternoon.